Welcome to the Natural Health Podcast, where we bring awareness of sustainable health in the business hustle space. Natural Health Podcast is perfect for the high-performing, business-minded individuals who want to work with their biochemistry to achieve success and optimal health. It's Friday, which means it's time for friends sharing facts about health, business, and overall success. In today's episode, we talk to Raquel. Is it Raquel?
Raquel, but it can be just Anna. Mm-hmm.
Anna, we'll talk to Anna, who will educate us on how digestive health and mental health go hand in hand, which is known as the gut-brain connection. Dr. Anna is a licensed naturopathic doctor working in Canada. She completed her training as a medical doctor, but soon found herself wanting to fully integrate her patients' mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being in her practice. It was from here that she decided to become a naturopath, as it provided her the ability to help her patients in a more holistic manner. With a special interest in the gut and mental health, she thrives on being able to provide individualized treatment, recognizing each person is unique and has their own unique story. Anna's favorite things and Anna's interesting things about her are that she was actually born in Portugal. She spends a large portion of her time away from the clinic baking and painting. And she's currently working on her yoga instructor certificate. Welcome to the Natural Podcast, Anna.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. I appreciate the invitation to talk with you today.
You're most welcome. So you were born in Portugal?
Yes. So I have all my family living there now. A majority, I'd say, for the last decade or so. I'm the youngster of the family, so I'm still active career-wise, but the majority of my family has retired and moved back to Portugal. So I have a lot of connection there. I studied there as well during university. So it's, a part of who we are, our makeup, our ancestry, and kind of what I also bring to the table.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So what's your favorite Portuguese food?
Oh, that's a tough question to answer. I think when I'm in Portugal, it's definitely the fresh seafood, because obviously living in Canada, we have our Great Lakes, and there's obviously the Atlantic coast and the Pacific coast. But in terms of access to freshly caught, wild caught fish that you can just go buy at the pier, it's rare or impossible unless you're having you go fishing in the lake. So I think when I'm back home, it's definitely the fresh seafood. And then, we can't have too many of those, but they're definitely delicious.
Yeah, beautiful. I actually have never been to Portugal. I do want to make my way there 100% and check it out.
Yes, well, I am a little biased, but it's a very small country, but there's just so much. It's so rich in history, and it's just such a combination of both new and old world. So I, love it for my own reasons, but I think, most of the people I speak with that have vacationed in Portugal have really come away enjoying it as much as I do. And so hopefully you'll make it out there.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, 100%. I would absolutely love to. Like you said, I've heard a lot that it's got a lot of history, and then the news side, and and the people, of course. I love the culture. So I would absolutely love to visit one day when everything opens up and we're allowed
to travel a little more freely without having to worry about, quarantining and all of those things.
Yeah.
So hopefully sooner than later.
Yeah, 100%. So in your bio, we've said that you used to be a doctor and then you moved to be a naturopath. So are you able to tell us a little bit about the key turning points in your journey to where you are today? That's a bit of a huge change that's happened in your life.
Yeah, I was. I think I was having a midlife crisis almost. You go through all the schooling, right? And it was always very much, since I can remember, a small child, it was very cliche. It was always medicine. I always wanted to be a doctor. And you kind of just go down that route. And then I think I romanticized what it would be like to actually practice day to day, what goes on behind the scenes, like the paperwork, the bureaucracies, the protocols, all that standardized care, which is obviously needed in many ways, but just the demand when you're in clinic, especially if you're in a specialty where you have 5 or 10 minutes for patient the other, it became a little overwhelming for me in the sense that it wasn't fulfilling. I was always worried that I'm like, I don't know these people. I'm not building relationships. I don't know what else is happening outside of the brief 5-minute symptom that they're trying to describe to me. And it felt very like transactional. And even though I understand, and I have thankfully many colleagues that adore and do and thrive so well in that environment, it wasn't for me. I remember having when I was doing my observerships for qualification here in Canada, I was kind of driving along and just thinking about like the day that I already had ahead of me. And I'm like, okay, when I retire, and I'm just like, at that point I was maybe like in my 30s, like late 20s, early 30s. And I'm like, oh, there's going to be a long road until retirement. And if I'm already looking at my day, thinking about that, that's an issue. But that it's all I ever wanted to do. So I'm like, okay, maybe I'll just make it work for me somehow. And that's when naturopathic medicine almost kind of, I think the universe plopped it in my lab, because I'm here in Ontario. We have the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine, and they offer a bridge program for medical graduates. And so everything just clicked. I'm like, okay, I can take the knowledge that I have. I can go through this accelerated program and come out of it with something that I hope and think is more aligned with the way that I want to do, medicine, how I want to practice and be able to provide care for my patients. So I think that was significant. I'm not really sure exactly how it all happened. I don't even remember exactly how I stumbled across the bridge program, but it was there. And, I had the support to apply for it, and I did. And then everything from there, as they say, it was history. So here we are.
Yeah, it's crazy how things just kind of fall in your lap to move forward and do that. It's crazy. And it's interesting the fact that, you're just driving along and you're just like, oh, okay, this is what my day's going to be. And I'm really looking for retirement. That clearly shows that you weren't aligned with what you're made to be doing.
Exactly. And that was like a pivotal moment, because, ever since I could remember, I was very much, and to a certain degree, in some respects, very much that type A personality, right? It was just kind of like, okay, academics, performance, got to be at the top. And it didn't make sense anymore. Like that to me was wearing, it was giving me anxiety. I'm just like, I can't do this. And like the paranoia, again, the performance of like always wanting to make sure that you're doing your best. I'm like, how do I do my best with a patient 5 or 10 minutes at an interval and not miss something and be diligent with the work? And so in a way, it was a selfish decision as well, because it was almost like covering my butt too, because I'm like, how am I going to practice this in a safe manner if I don't even have time to really understand maybe what else is behind this? And that's what happens when you're kind of made to make very quick decisions. And for the most part, that works well, and it's part of your growing and your experience and your practice, right? Those things come naturally. But for me, it was just like, no, this is going to give me some kind of chronic disease with the amount of stress I'm putting on myself. Eventually, I'm either going to become very jaded with what I do, and it's going to be very robotic, or I'm probably not going to fare very well, because this kind of lifestyle that goes along with that service provider was not something that I was really looking forward to. Not that, naturopathic medicine is any easier in the sense of like skill set, but the fact that it allowed me more time to really understand the person in front of me, and not only try to manage their symptom, but really try to provide some more in terms of healing for the whole person, and not just like that one little snapshot that we get, I guess means more to me than the whole switch that had to happen from one career to another.
Yeah, I get that 100%. And good on you for recognizing that within yourself and just being like, I'm actually not serving the individual that's in front of me to the full potential that I know I can. How can I do this? Okay, I'll go study to be an ND. That takes a lot of power, a lot of self-awareness and emotional intelligence to be able to do that. And here you are sitting in front of us. So anyone that's listening that's in a career shift or wanting to kind of ask themselves question what's happening, there you go, you're the proof that it can be done, from moving from a doctor to be a naturopathic doctor.
Yes, and thank you for that. And to me it almost seems like, yeah, of course, this is just how it was supposed to be. But looking back, and even sometimes, when you're having those days that aren't, the highs, that you're like, oh, what did I get myself into, right? Because if you had just gone down that path, it was easy in the sense it was already laid out for you, right? You're on that career path. It's a different setup in terms of business, if we want to think of it. And I hate to talk about healthcare as business, but when we bring in that the naturopathic realm versus the allopathic, the way that you have to provide your service is different. So on those days, you really think of like, oh boy. But if you're really true to what you had wanted to do and you feel as though, no, I'll take my lumps now, but like, I know looking in the future, I'm going to be happier for it and more fulfilled, right? So that's what keeps you going on those days. And if anyone is listening to us that's thinking like, oh, especially after the last year that we've had, a lot of people have to pivot and shift how their employment looks like. It's scary. It is. It's not something easy to do. And I was fortunate enough, to have the support of my parents that really backed my decision of like, okay, it's okay. It's almost like you needed somebody to tell you like, it's okay. Continue going down that route that you kind of had just like told yourself was it. To have that ability to make the change when you need to, so that you're not looking down the road in 10 or 20 years and being that grumpy person. This is what I used to tell people. I don't want to be that person that's resentful or angry because I didn't make the choices that I needed to, and now I resent the work that I do, the people that made me continue down that path, or even like my patients in front of me, because now they're in here and they want me to solve everything in 5 or 10 minutes, right? I didn't want to become that person. And it's cliche as it sounds, nothing that's worth it is easy, and it usually takes time, and it's very true. But I think if you're in the right place, it definitely outweighs all the less than better days that you might.
I like how you're like, I don't want to be that resentful person, but then also you're not going to be the people that are in front of you that you're trying to assist with your knowledge. You're not going to give them 100%. So essentially you kind of did them a favor too, and you pulled yourself out of it.
Yeah.
So then you can be like, I'm doing this for your benefit too.
Yeah, exactly. In a way, because you do that. I know, like, I was only going to be giving part of, as you mentioned, of what I had envisioned for that care. And so it was going to be like soul draining for me, but also a disservice to that patient, because I wouldn't have been happy to be doing that type of work. And so I always say, I'm so thankful for like my colleagues that do it well, and are happy to be able to in that manner, because we need them. It just
100%.
wasn't.
100%. We need them. Yeah, 100. You said that right. 100%. We need them. I always say I put my hat off to them. I'm so glad that they're there and they do what they do, because they do an amazing job in their specialty, which is amazing. But there's a spot for every individual in different things in different sectors. So So with your life moving forward and things like that. So here on the podcast, talk a lot about success and how it means different things to different people. And I can just imagine a success would have meant different to you a few years ago to what it does now. So what does success look like for you now, Anna?
Oh, that's currently, like, if I was going to talk about this snapshot, it would be, having that, what we envision at least as like that successful business, it's like thriving, that, allows you to have time to do everything within clinic, but also have time for your own personal life, that work-life balance, being financially independent. I think, those are all like the traditional constructs, but at the end of the day, especially given like the history that's brought me here, it's just like success really is for me like that peace of mind. If I'm like being content to do what I do and having that peace of mind that you are doing what you're meant to and you're where you're meant to be at that time, would now kind of sum up what success looks like for me. So it's shifted from that very A-type, accolades and money and a certain like maybe lifestyle to much more of, are you genuinely happy with what you're doing and what you're providing? Are you building that legacy? And for me, that is interpreted as success. So it's definitely shifted.
Yeah. And what you just said takes a lot of trust into something outside of yourself to be able to achieve that success, which is huge.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's part of this journey has been interesting because it has shifted so much in my own personal, journey and how I maybe view things, how I relate to like the universe, divine, God, whatever you resonate with. But it's been quite a lot of life lessons packed into just a few years, but it's been interesting. I think I'm definitely better for it. So I'm more of a complete person now and not just a shell of everything.
And they can just be like, all right, I've done my lessons in a short period. Give me a bit of a break now.
Yes. Yeah. It's like, okay, we fast tracked all of this. Got it. Life's not all about this or this. Right. Okay. Let's smooth sailing from now on in. We need a little time to breathe, right? I need the rewards now to come in.
Beautiful. You're like, got the seeds, I've sown them, I've been watering them, give me the fruit now.
Yes. Yeah. Time to harvest, I think would be a good analogy.
Yeah, beautiful. So let's get into and talk about today's topic. I know we've been talking, getting to know you, what you've been about. I mean, the audience now understands more about yourself, which is amazing. What an amazing person you are. But let's talk about the topic that they're all here for, the gut-brain connection and how digestive health and mental health go absolutely hand in hand. Can you give us a brief explanation of the gut-brain axis in a way?
Yeah. So in a simple way to think about it is, we have our central nervous system. So like our brain and our spinal cord. And then we have like our peripheral nervous system. So that's in the other areas away from the brain and the spinal cord. And part of that is housed in the gut. So that's known as like our enteric nervous system. And along with what's important in our enteric nervous system is also the trillions of microbes that are part of our gut flora. And so when we talk about our gut and brain axis, it's essentially like that pathway, the roads of communication between our brain and our gut and vice versa. And so I'm not sure if many of you that are listening know, but sometimes we even call our gut like our second brain. And this is because there are so many things that happen within the gut that affect directly like our brain health, not just in terms of mental health, but even emotional well-being. So serotonin, I think everyone, has heard about it, the happy chemical, the thing that's often talked about when we talk about things like depression. A good portion, like a majority, like 90+% of it's actually produced within the gut. When we tell that to many people, they're surprised to hear that. And it's the gut flora responsible for that. But also it's responsible for other like neurochemicals, other things that it produces that's important for communicating to our brain, in addition to like factors that affect our immune system and even like the processes of like inflammation and other hormones that are important for regulation within our body. So essentially, gut-brain axis is the conversation that's happening between the gut and the brain. So when we're nervous before like maybe a podcast interview or, that day at work and you feel a little nauseous or you have to run to the bathroom a few times, that right there tells you, there's something happening between what I'm thinking of or what's happening and what's happening in my gut, or when we feel butterflies in our stomach, as the adage goes, when we're, maybe in front of someone that, intimidates us or that we're excited So all those things happen for a reason, and it's because of this communication that occurs between these two systems.
Yeah, beautiful. It's an absolutely great explanation. And I mean, like you said, a lot of us actually, without knowing the gut brain axis, a lot of us actually can feel it. Like when you get nervous, if you've sat for an exam at uni or at school and you're just on the toilet, or you're feeling sick, you're not feeling yourself, well, that clearly just shows to you that it's connected in a way. Or when you get that gut feeling, like you said, when you're feeling anxious about something, you're like, oh, I have that gut feeling. That just shows us that without us even knowing the human body or the words about it, that there is a link. We know that as humans. We know that as, as individuals, that there is a link.
Yes.
But how
we've
does
experienced it?
Yeah, we've experienced it even since we were little. Like you talk to a kid and they'll be like, yeah, my belly hurts when they're emotional or something.
Exactly. And that's, part of it, children usually, don't present, as we say, like typically, especially if they're anxious, with like the things that usually adults will talk about, like rumination. I'm thinking about the same thing, but exactly, they'll say, like, oh, my tummy hurts, or I don't feel well. And that's exactly part of the reasoning why. They might not have the words to vocalize it, but their body definitely knows what's happening.
Yeah, 100%. So how does the gut impact the brain and vice versa?
So much like I was saying beforehand, especially when we're talking about brain health or mental health, it's what's happening in or with our gut flora. So a lot of the studies, other than obviously the physiology, compounds that are actually being produced, like serotonin, that have like that direct impact, for example, when we talk about literature, like the things that we're starting to understand, a lot of it we can relay back to the microbiome. So if we have a good, healthy, diverse microbiome, usually we're better for it, like happier brain, less mood disorders. When there's dysbiosis, so like there's an imbalance in that gut flora, when like strains that are not like, I don't like to say bad and good guys, because I hate creating labels, but if we want to think of it that way, the strains are more of one strain that shouldn't be there. It kind of crowds out the good guys that we need to keep maybe those neurochemicals being produced, if we want to think of it at factory, right? So if we have like the not so efficient workers and the good workers, and like the not so efficient workers are like crowding out the ones that are there to do the work, right? We're going to seeing some of those repercussions. So that link, that lack of diversity between what's happening in our gut, that's what's been more correlated to things like anxiety, depression, dementia even, which can sometimes be very surprising, things like other neurological disorders like Parkinson's. So we need to really fortify our gut and our microbiome so that we can, if not prevent some of these things, at least not worsen or further trigger the worsening of some of these conditions.
And as you were talking, I was just thinking in a sense of there's so many things around us that impact our gut microbe and that destroy it in a way. Well, destroy is a bit dramatic, but that we alter it. And like you said, the balance goes out of whack in simple terms. So it's kind of like there's so many things that are impacting that. Like the first thing that comes to my mind is medication. Antibiotics and so forth, and other medications, toxins, our water and so forth. So that's crazy that can impact us.
Yes. And I was just having this conversation this past week because actually on Instagram, I had uploaded very innocently a topic of like long-term use of PPI. So the things that some of us take for lowering our stomach acid and its effect on our microbiome. And I think that got me into some hot water. Maybe it's the way I presented the information, but it's, I think when we're talking about concepts that have been so inside the box for a very long time, that when we bring up new information, and this is a thing, like I know with naturopathic medicine, sometimes we can be very unconventional or be at the forefront of some theories because we see it, because we look at a different way, and it's almost like we're already seeing it before maybe all the research is there to back us up. But with like PPI use, for example, like antibiotics, we know there's literature that says, it really does damage to that diversity of the microbiome, just like certain antibiotics, and that in terms of when we use it for longer than it should be used for. And unfortunately, one of those medications that you're put on and then no one checks to see if you're still on it. Like 10 years down the road, you're still using that PPI that was meant for 2 months. So it's going to have effects. And so my thing is, especially coming from an allopathic or conventional, I have, like I said, I have no care really one way or another if you're on a pharmaceutical or not, and they're very much needed many times during your life. The fact is we need informed consent. So patients need to know, okay, if I'm going to be using this for 10 years or 20 years, like what am I risking? And we know that you might be risking, issues with dementia or mood disorders. Obviously, it's not the only cause of depression. There's many things that go into mood disorders, but it's one of the things that we should at least be aware of. Because, power, knowledge is power. So if you go into it knowing, then you can, I think, make a more balanced decision. So there's so many things that affect our microbiome, and medication is definitely one of them.
That's a great point that you said there. And like on packets, it does say the PPI proton pump inhibitors that are used usually for, gastrointestinal reflux and so forth. So this does say on there to use it for 2-3 weeks, months, or short term, right? And you're saying that. I actually had experience and I got given prescribed a PPI in my early 20s. And I took it the next day, and I'm not making this dramatic. The next day I went downstairs, I went to my mum and I went, Mum, I have never felt this low in my whole life. That was after taking it for 1 or 2 days. And my mum's like, what has changed? Get off them now. So if that had an impact, I know I'm a little bit sensitive to those things because I never used to take medication and things like that. But if that had an impact on myself and I felt it without even knowing what the body does, imagine what impact that's having long-term on individuals, like the gut microbe, exactly what we're talking about. It impacts the gut microbe, which then impacted my mental health where I felt really, really low.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, that's the thing, right? There are cases, obviously, that I guess the risks or the benefits, I should say, really do outweigh the risks, right? Depending on whatever. So I know, like in our conversation, whoever's listening or watching, right? These are like generalized recommendations. So for the majority of patients, they don't necessarily usually need to be on for long term unless they're dealing with other like extenuating health concerns. And obviously, speak with your personal physician. But in terms of just information, it is important for patients to know this because sometimes, it goes back to how well they're going to feel. And if you're really invested in optimizing your patient's well-being, these are the things they need to know. Even if you still agree 100% they need to be on a PPI for whatever reason, they still need to know, hey, long-term, this might be a cause. So, talk with us. Let's see if there are other. This is the thing that's always left out of the conversation. It's not saying that using PPIs is wrong. It's like, I'm going to be known now as the anti-digestion and PPI. Just like that. I know they're going to come after me now for saying this, but it's not about that at all. It's just about knowing that there's more to it. And that's where I wanted the conversation to go. First, know what long-term use of certain things can do. That's just plain informed consent, but also know that there are, complementary therapies that you can be doing. The conversation doesn't end with like, I have reflux, so I'm going to take a PPI, period. Okay, there's like so many things that can be done. And in practice, like GERD, like gastroesophageal reflux disease is the thing that I see the most improvement in the shortest amount of time, which is rare for naturopathic medicine, that you are able to do something and in such a short period of time, patients see like a 180 in terms of symptoms. So I'm like, there's more out there. And we just need to tell people that it exists.
Yeah, 100%. I think the main message that you're coming across with was to actually be advised with whatever you're taking, even if it's supplements. Doesn't have to be just pharmaceutical. Even if it's supplements, herbs, whatever you're putting inside of, even your food, whatever you're putting inside of your body, you need to question, where did this come from? What is it? What's the short-term benefits? What's the long-term benefits? But also, what are the disadvantages in it all? And then see if it is something that you want to take, and know that it may impact your microbiome, whatever it is, which may impact your mental health essentially. But what would you say are some common signs and symptoms that the audience may have at the moment, so they know they might have a gut-brain axis issue?
Okay, so usually the things that people will note first, because it's usually more distressing, are like all the things that you might hear when somebody's having like some GI or issue. So for example, changes in bowel movements. So either, frequent diarrhea, or you're constipated, or in some cases, you might see both alternating diarrhea and constipation. Bloating is also a symptom or a sign that you see a good deal of the time. So changes in bowel movements, bloating, especially when we're talking about microbiome and other what we call, like I said before, like dysbiosis at gut, flora imbalance, things like excess, like flatulence and just gassiness, changes from your norm. But then other than that, so things even like reflux, even other than those things that we always associate with like the gut, other issues, that could potentially point us to there being a problem, if we want to think of it that way, with the axis, or things like even like headaches, like feeling foggy brain, not really feeling sharp. So maybe tasks that you used to do or work, sometimes it's a place where like I can't do this as quickly, or I'm having difficulty like being as efficient. Generalized like fatigue. You don't know why, like I'm always just like tired, or takes me a longer time to do things, could all point us in the direction of like an issue in our gut health that is now kind of having consequences within our mental health as well. And this is in addition to patients that may already experience low mood or anxiety, that might see almost like an uptick or feeling those things more frequently than they had in the past. So those are good starting points or clues into starting the questioning. Not everything will relate back to gut-brain axis, but a good majority. Yeah. That's usually at the end of the day, that's usually where the finger points.
Yeah, I can just imagine the audience listening and being like, I have absolutely all of them. Or exactly. most of them tick, tick, tick. So essentially, yeah. And you've mentioned dementia, right, as being a mental, a cognitive health issue.
Yes.
That can arise from gastrointestinal abnormalities. But what are some other mental health issues that can arise from these imbalances of your gut microbe?
Okay, so anxiety is the one that's been, heavily tested. It seems as though in men and women differently, different types of strains of are in the gut flora. If we have less of them, and they differ between like the bifidobacterium and the lactobacillus for men or women, that even in healthy, what the studies would call healthy patients, they see when they have those strains in less numbers, they're more likely to then have symptoms that are correlated to anxiety, for example. Similarly with like depression and low mood, obviously depression, much like anxiety, it's a complex issue. It's not just, your gut isn't working properly, so now you're going to feel depressed. There's many factors, lifestyle factors, other imbalances in other neurochemicals, but the gut can also play a major role. And again, in terms of studies, they're seeing that more and more in terms of if we can correct that microbiome, that environment, patients in terms of like depression scale and other markers have like improved quality of life and sometimes even resolution of some of their symptoms. And then there's like to just generalize, there's a whole other camp of disorders or chronic disease that we can attribute that might be in terms of cognitive health and neurological health because of malabsorption. So then if we're not even talking about the microbiome, but we're just talking about, if our digestion isn't working and we're not absorbing the nutrients we need, certain nutrient deficiencies can also impact us, especially neurologically. So when we're low in like B12, vitamin BA, vitamin D, vitamin E, those things will also have an impact in terms of our like peripheral like nervous system, especially things like numbness, difficulty in walking, like ataxia. And that puts us into like more of a neurological talk, but just to bring awareness that it's not just, about bacteria and what they're doing, but also, from a very simple standpoint, if we're not absorbing what we're eating, even off the bat, these things will also affect both our mood, like vitamin D, the association of like low mood and low levels of vitamin D, but also neurological tingling and numbness in our extremities, how we walk. So there's a lot there. There's a whole can of worms that we can open once we start talking about digestion, nutrient deficiencies, and kind of the signs and symptoms that come along with that.
Yeah, it's absolutely huge. And I love the fact that you mentioned absorption, because people that are listening to this podcast are like, you know what, I eat pretty healthy. I look at what I ate. I ate lots of vegetables and so forth. But then the thing is, okay, you are eating that, but what of that are you actually absorbing? And that is where the issue arises. So I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because the issue may not be with what you're putting in your mouth. The issue may actually be what's getting absorbed. What is that? What is the gut bacteria doing? What's the absorption rate going? Have you got enough stomach acid? Have you got this, that?
Yes.
Is it absorbing and taking the nutrients out of that food, or is the food just coming in and out?
Exactly. And that's huge, because it seems like such a waste, literally and figuratively, like you're putting in all this effort, you're eating, you're maybe investing in like, some organic produce and better quality, like proteins. And then to not really be making the most of that fuel, it just seems so sad. It makes me so sad to think about that, because you're doing your best and you're not getting the benefit of it. And maybe even having some of the consequences of like that malabsorption. You're like, but I'm doing, like you said, like I'm doing everything correctly, or what I hope is correct, and I'm eating whole foods diet, and I'm still experiencing X, Y, and Z. And so sometimes that key really starts with absorption, like what's happening in and around the digestion, not just are you eating the things that we'd hope to see you eat.
Yeah, you're so right. And then thinking about it too, the gut brain, like the thing is we're so stressed out, and when we're so stressed out, our absorption rate goes lower and lower, which then them two just impact each other like absolutely crazy.
Yeah, that's what I always like tell my patients. It's just like, as good as evolution has been to get us to the point where we are, right? There's certain things that we haven't been able to evolve past. And so that fight or flight, it was great when we were running away from like that saber-toothed tiger, but the fact that I'm stressed out because I'm sitting in front of my computer and I'm like on a Zoom call, and like, my boss is yelling at me because I need to get a deadline done. That does not benefit us to be in that fight or flight mode, but our body is still interpreting it as the same. So like if you just had your lunch and you come back from your lunch break and then you're being yelled at, because you haven't done X, Y, or Z, our body is no longer concerned about digestion because it's under like what it perceives as a danger. So not all our blood, but like a good majority of blood and other things are diverted to like your muscles, right? Because it's preparing you to run away from the thing that's causing you all the stress. And so our digestion is then impacted. And that's, that important conversation, like you got rest to digest. What I keep repeating to my patients, and digest, right? You really need to turn on that parasympathetic nervous system, the thing that relaxes us, so we can actually eat and absorb and make the most of our food. So bringing in that mindful component. But, the majority of us, I see people, they're driving, they're eating in their car, they're like eating at their desk, they're scrolling on social media while they're having their snack. And it's not helping our digestion.
Yeah. So you've heard it right here. Anna said, do not have a business meeting around lunch. Don't have it during lunch. Don't have it after lunch. And it's interesting because a lot of business professionals, they have business lunches and business dinners, which are usually very stressful. And
it's like that working lunch. And I'm like, no, don't do that. Don't promote this.
No, yes. It's kind of like, if you really want to make good business, take that person to a yoga class, take that person for a bit of a walk, take that
would be lovely.
out for a meditation, do some breathing exercises together before you have your meeting. Oh my gosh, imagine how much that would impact their business, how much it would impact the whole economy. It would just be...
That's lovely. I had never really thought of it.
Well, you made me think about it. You said it, and I just expanded on it.
Exactly, because I'm not a fan of the working lunch. I'm like, why are we associating something so pleasurable and so nice as a meal with talking shop? I don't know. Even if you're very excited, because that's the thing. Sometimes we have that idea that stress is bad. It's just right. And sometimes stress, that excitement of something, you could be very excited about, brokering that business deal. It could be a happy excitement, but it's still not optimal for our digestion. So if we can just have mealtime be a sacred moment when it's just all about the food and about fueling our body, and then we can go back to everything else. I think even that simple shift would make such a big impact in terms of digestive health for the majority of us, because a lot of us are locked into that kind of go, and I don't have time to eat, so I'm just going to eat while I work. And that's just setting us up for disaster.
Yeah, 100. I couldn't agree more. In Portugal, do they have the siesta? Do they have the nap after a certain time?
No. Well, I mean, maybe children or maybe the elderly, they kind of get zonked out after
they're the smart ones.
But exactly, because they know we have those natural dips for a reason, because it's okay, it's time to rest. That's more commonly in Spain, but in Portugal we have kind of what we call the merinda, which is that afternoon meal that's between kind of lunch and when you actually have dinner. So that's kind of another way of just okay, let's just have a snack. Let's break down the day and sit down, have a coffee. Of course, Portuguese love their bread. So there's always bread at some, at some kind of a meal time or snack time. So we don't actually take that nap, but we definitely make time to eat again.
Yeah. And
before we get back.
And that social aspect is similar to a nap because it puts you in a parasympathetic mode, right?
Exactly. It's kind of where someone has culturally given you permission to take that break, right? It's kind of it's expected of you. You kind of, okay, break for coffee or tea or whatever it is that you enjoy eating at that time. But it's almost like you've been granted that permission. So you don't feel bad about not being productive, right? Or because you're not continuing working. So in a way, as you said, that really puts you into that parasympathetic because you're expected to relax for a moment.
Yeah, and especially individuals who have a creative side of their job, they need to be so much more in the parasympathetic than sympathetic. They need to be relaxed, calm, because that's when all the imagination, that's when all the creativity comes out.
Damn, that's when you're really at your best, right? Because you're not kind of hyper vigilant. You're not waiting for that scary thing to pop out at you. So you're really able to
scary boss popping at you.
I know, you're exactly. You're those email notifications, the phone's ringing, all of that triggers so much more of that fight or flight, because you're always under, I don't know, just that stress of okay, when's something else going to happen now that I need to attend to? And it's just, we can't, since the moment we get up until we go to bed, it's always this technology. So anyone at any time can reach out with hey, can you do this? Or hey, we need to do that, right? There's no off. And it's also been kind of demonized. Taking time for yourself or telling people I'm not going to answer emails after 6 p.m. It's just oh, that's not, a productive work, I guess, mentality to have, if we want to call it that way. It's just, you always have to be on, you always have to hustle. And we really need to get away from, I guess, glorifying that and really get back to actually it's actually pretty cool to give yourself some time and boundaries. It's probably harder to do those things than it is to just try to appease everyone all that time. But again, also probably a conversation for another time because it's
no, I
huge,
love
right?
that. I love that. I love that you spoke about that but then we also forget that we have control over it and we can switch all those things off. We
Yes.
probably shouldn't in our eyes, but we can. So we still have that control, but we just need to take it back and put that phone on
Mm-hmm.
airplane mode, turn off those notifications, have that lunch break. Because when people know you're not available from 1 to 2 every day, they're not going to contact you because you've put those
Yeah,
boundaries, exactly what you said, the
exactly.
boundaries.
Yeah, it's just having like that courage initially to really set those and be firm, right? And then being okay with maybe a little, some ruffled feathers in the beginning. But if you are, privileged enough to be able to set those times for yourself, then I would suggest, consider doing it. It's
Yeah.
it's going to be a world of change.
100%, 100%. Well, let's get back to the bacterial population, the microbiome, right? So,
Mhm.
how can we manage the bacterial population in the gut, and how can that help us improve our mental health?
Okay, so well, some of the things we've touched upon, right? So, our diet. So our diet is a good contributor to what's actually present in our gut microbiome. So, for example, if we're eating things like fermented foods, things that are probiotic rich, things like kefir or sauerkraut or kimchi, tempeh, there's a whole category of foods that are enriched naturally because of the fermentation process with probiotics. So that's one of the ways we can do it through diet. We can do that through supplementation, depending on what we want to do. So if it's more managing your overall health, a diet is a great place to do it. If we're really trying to get you results, or if you're coming in with a specific condition like anxiety or depression or cognitive decline, there are specific strains that we should supplement with. That have been researched in terms of actually having beneficial outcomes. So that's a good time to use a probiotic, like a good quality, high dose probiotic. So that's speaking directly to the microbiome. But then, much like you said, right, it's also about how are we cultivating that happy microbiome. So it's almost like we can't out supplement all the chronic stress. So we can be guzzling down all the probiotics. We continue to have some of those same habits, like if we continue to live in that chronic stress threshold, then we're still going to continue running into those problems in terms of our microbiome, because we're going to create some issues there. And so that needs to be brought into the picture of like cultivating that environment is not only supplementing, but it's helping it flourish really. And one of the big things we talk about is reducing our stress, reducing our inflammation, having that appropriate diet as well to support it. So that's a good first place to think about it, from a lifestyle perspective, and then supplementation if you're working on a particular goal, or if you're coming in with a condition that we want to try to optimize or improve.
Yeah. So you spoke about food. So what would be some foods which could contribute to this, to assisting the gut-brain axis?
Well, I think we kind of started talking about it a little while ago in terms of having that whole foods diet. So essentially we want to, if we want to think of our gut as kind of like a fortress, right? We want to be able to fortify it and not necessarily create damage or inflammation. So then we're going to shift from kind of like those inflammatory foods, or the foods that have the potential to be inflammatory. Not everyone reacts the same way to all the foods. Those things that are pretty well known by now, like high sugar diets, highly processed food diets, diets heavy in like vegetable oils that are highly inflammatory. So those things are going to work against that happy microbiome. So then when we're thinking about foods to incorporate, okay, then what am I going to eat? We want to think about, especially if we're thinking gut and brain, like high antioxidant foods. So things that have like high like polyphenols, like, the green teas, the olive oil, the berries are great antioxidants, and they're add a little sweetness. But then also like the omega-3 rich foods, again, also great for brain health, but also in terms of lowering that inflammation. So wild caught fatty fish. If you happen to be in Portugal, you can enjoy a lot of it, or maybe on the coast in Australia, so taking advantage of that. But also like seeds and nuts if you're vegan or vegetarian and don't eat fish, so there's other options there for you as well. And then also the foods that support that microbiome specifically. So high fiber foods like the prebiotics that we want to make sure we're feeding that bacteria. So we've got it in there. Now we need to make it happy. We need to feed it with the things it likes. So usually like high fiber diet, things are rich in things that feed, like a specific fiber that feed that good bacteria. And then other anti-inflammatory foods as well. So things like turmeric, adding that into your diet if it culturally makes sense for you in supplementation form, are good places to start. Rosemary, association between gut health and brain health with rosemary. So there's a lot of option, but basically what it sums down to is a good whole foods diet with a lot of variety. And then those foods that I mentioned, the fermented foods, if you enjoy them, to incorporate your diet as well.
Yeah. I love the fact that you mentioned prebiotics. And I know this might be a new thing to a few people,
Yes.
and but the probiotics are absolutely essential, but then not many individuals focus on the prebiotics. And that's why they're always needing to supplement with probiotics, because they're not maintaining their bacteria.
Yes.
So with the prebiotics, do you have a favorite prebiotic?
Well, because again, I'm Portuguese. So in terms of food, anything with garlic and onion are like good ways to add prebiotics. So if you tolerate that, I know, again, especially when we're talking digestion off the bat, if you're having issues with digestion, sometimes like the high sulfur compound foods, such as onions and garlic, can be a little heavy on digestion or difficult to digest. But hopefully that's something we work on. But even things like apples are usually pretty friendly for the majority to have good quantities of prebiotics, like Jerusalem artichoke, depending if you've ever cooked with that, like leeks. So there's some good options to do it in terms of diet modification.
Yeah.
But anything like really, so obviously those foods are specific, but a good amount of fiber in our diet, because a lot of the standard, as they call the standard American diet, but really kind of just like the Western diet, is really lacking in a lot of fiber. So if you're getting enough fiber, more than you're going to get enough prebiotics in your diet through dietary measures without necessarily a supplement. But you could always do psyllium or like things like flax. Those are also in to increase your fiber and increase your prebiotic, but just a diverse, colorful diet with a lot of fruit, veg.
Yeah.
Is
and when you look at culturally food that was done years and years ago without them even knowing the word probiotic,
yes.
when you look at their food combination, you're like, oh my gosh, they are so smart. I can't believe they included the prebiotic and the probiotic, because like my family is Croatian, and they had polenta with Greek yogurt and garlic, which is prebiotic and probiotic.
See.
So
yeah, exactly.
Combined in
I
there.
love polenta. So it's like, exactly. So you see, healthy food, whatever that means, it can be delicious. And if you look across like culturally, it makes sense with what they were eating traditionally to be able to sustain a better gut health, because things some years ago weren't readily accessible, supplements, like even healthcare, you really had to make sure you were eating well, or as well as you could, to maintain your health. And so these things didn't just occur, right? They're eating this way for a reason. It's most likely because it had worked for that culture for time and eons before we kind of started industrializing some of our food, right? So if we can get more to the basics of what food looked like around the world, I think we would be a good place.
Yeah, that's so well said. And I read a study the other day, and it was saying that most of the children are getting their vitamin C from French fries, Macca's French fries.
Oh, wow. I sound like I didn't even hide my expression very well. It's just like oh gosh, I guess they're eating all that ketchup.
Yeah, it's
tomato with.
So it's unfortunately, I think, it's people like us. We need to push that education on diet, push that education through food, and how beneficial it is. I mean, it can help your mental health just through food. Exactly what this whole topic that we've spoken about today. It can help your gut, it can help your mental health. And on that note, we've spoken about a few foods which sound absolutely yummy. But are there any supplements that come to your mind besides probiotics? And you mentioned turmeric in supplement form. Is there anything else that pops to your mind that could help the gut-brain axis?
Well, there's a lot, right? Supplements have been, and we were having a little bit of that discussion beforehand. There's a supplement for everything now. But in terms of the gut-brain axis, depending on what your symptoms are and maybe why you may or may not be experiencing one symptom versus another, things like you mentioned initially, like digestive enzymes, and are you having enough of that stomach acid? So things like HCl might be important if that's an issue for you, right? So we want to start with, okay, let's absorb the things we're eating well. So those are a good times to take advantage of that. If you're experiencing things like reflux, zinc supplementation can be important for you there, even vitamin D. But then there's all the other things that I really like to use in terms of botanicals, more in terms of helping to heal that mucosa or that lining. And those are things like DGL, like licorice or like marshmallow root or slippery elm bark. So those are always nice, and they're usually tasty as well, especially if you have them as like powders to even make like teas and gels from. And then things like I think have been a buzzword, especially when we talk about gut health, has been things like L-glutamine in terms of like being that building block, especially in the realm of like IBS. And it's the chicken and the egg, which came first. You have low L-glutamine and then you have IBS, or it's contributed to this low L-glutamine level. So there's a world of potential supplementation. It really does depend on what symptoms you're experiencing and what the goal is. But there's a few favorites. Those are probably some of the ones I use most frequently.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. Yeah, I love all those supplements that you mentioned.
Yes.
We've given so many tips and practical advice to the individuals, but if you can sum it up to 3 practical tips for the audience to incorporate to improve both their gut and mental health, what would it be?
So in 3, well, because we're talking about in 3s, I usually talk about like the 3 pillars of health. That's going to get you through gut health, gut brain health, which are diet, resting and sleep, so and our movement, so our exercise. So in terms of this conversation, so diet, much like we said, getting away from packaged food, so trying to reduce what you bring into the home that's packaged. If you're buying from the produce section, then you're going to be okay for the most part, as long as those foods aren't inherently triggers for you. And that's a conversation for another time, but eating a whole foods diet as best as you can and getting away from packaged goods. So if you're going out grocery shopping this week, pick up one less thing that you might have picked up that comes from a box or a package. It's a good place to, start changing or shifting maybe what your diet looks like. And then in terms of resting, obviously there's actually been some literature in terms of sleep, microbiome, the implications on poor sleepers and poor microbiome and poor microbiome, and then infecting your sleep. So that, again, that's a conversation all into itself. But getting rest, not glorifying that like 18-hour work day, like really having time to sleep, to recover. It's also going to have a beneficial impact on your microbiome, and bringing in those moments of relaxation in and around your mealtime. So if you're not a fan of, when we tell you to like, oh, you should do the breathing exercises or meditation, bring more mindfulness. If you just do it around your mealtime, just take a few deep breaths before you sit to eat, that's going to be just as good, especially if you're starting off. And then the component of movement. So, exercise, it's any type of exercise. I know, again, exercise is another word that people are like, oh, exercise, I have to go to the gym. But any type of movement, usually that's why I call it like movement or body movement. So, getting up from your desk and dancing to your favorite song, going out for a quick walk on your lunch break, or having that walk or yoga class before that big meeting if you're able to. All those things are going to impact how our body's perceiving stress. And then that's going to have a huge impact on our microbiome, and as well as staving off that fight or flight. So then it's hard to make it black and white, but you see like all these things are coming together. So a good quality diet, getting adequate rest, or at least trying to put that into play, and remembering to move our body so we can really also work on limiting that amount of stress that we're always constantly under.
Yeah. Wow. Like so many points. I hope that the audience had their notepad out and was popping it all down. But essentially, the good diet, the rest, and you need that exercise, that movement. Doesn't mean going to the gym.
Yeah.
It means just moving around. And there was a recent study that came out that spoke about stand-up desks, how much they've reduced the risk of cardiovascular disease in workers, which is crazy because it just means you're standing. But just having that reduce the rate of heart attacks and cardiovascular disease is just crazy. So totally in line with what you said.
Yes, I haven't invested in one, but it's like I've been eyeing them because it's just like, and even for like our posture, even if we're not thinking like down the road of like, okay, how's my cardiovascular disease? But I guess anyone that really follows me on like social media, I'm always complaining about like, especially again, because of that certification I'm doing, I'm like the person with the tightest hamstrings, and all this sitting at my desk it's not working for us. And so I'm just like, I need a standing desk.
Yeah, I've got one right now. I'm using one right now. I'm standing. Lovely, I'm standing. I try to stand most of these podcasts. Sometimes I sit, but I try to stand because I know the benefits of standing. I understand what's happening in my body. And it also allows you to talk a lot clearer and get that out. And yeah, it's just amazing. Absolutely love that. So we'll come to the end of the podcast, and to finish off, I also ask all my guests, as this is the Natural Health Podcast, what is your best kept natural health hack? I mean, you've shared so many, but what's one that you may do and it's one of your health hacks?
There's a lot. I think if I had to say one thing, and I guess like going old school, because I don't know if it's talked a lot about now, and it's something I actually don't really enjoy, but I think it's something so important. Are like contrast showers, like hydrotherapy. It's really like harking to the old.
I don't think anyone's ever said they love them. I don't think anyone's ever said they love them.
I think like sometimes I talk to people who are like, oh yeah, they're all about like, especially like here in Canada, like the polar bear dips, like going for that dip in like a cold like lake. It's not pleasant, but if you really build them in, like the contrast showers on a day-to-day, if you start slow, they have so much potential. And it's something that for the majority of people, if they're able, they can do it. It's free, it's accessible at home. We all take a shower, so you might as well build it in. So it's not asking you necessarily to go out and get something or take something, but it could be so beneficial. So that alternating hot and cold, great for circulation. It's great for moving like lymph, especially if you've been sitting all day, if you don't have that standing desk. Yes. I would advise doing some contrast showers, even if it's just on the lower part of your body. But if you really want to get all the benefits, head to toe, good in terms of optimizing your immune health, your inflammation. So there's so much benefit, hair and skin, even if you're just thinking about it from a very vain point of view, and you're like, how do I get, my hair shinier and better skin, getting more oxygen to your skin, especially again, here in Canada, like our homes are quite warm and heated in the winter. So
you just go in and out of your home.
Yeah, just jump in this. Sometimes some people that like do that challenge of just running out into the snow on the days that we have more snowfall. So again, have fun with it. It doesn't, and this just have to be expensive or gimmicky. Sometimes it's the simple things that really have a lot of benefit, but that we've kind of just gotten away from because again, they're not complex. So it's almost like it's too simple to work.
Yeah.
I think, for the sake of being a novel answer and something that we don't often talk about, I think I would say a good health hack might be some contrast hydrotherapy.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks so much for sharing all that with us. I mean, the audience must be
Welcome.
like, oh my gosh, I love Anna's story. I love what she's been through. I love what she stands
thank you.
for. Where would they be able to find you and get in contact with you?
Right. So right now, like obviously if you're not living in Ontario, calling the clinic would probably not be the best way to contact me. But, if you follow me on social media, there I post a lot about, gut and mental health, the things that I enjoy most. But, there's always a little snippets of like good food, some fun exercises, some of that yoga journey. So a little bit of just inspiration, hopefully, and information, because that's really what it's about, to be able to connect and just share that knowledge for those that might not be able to come into the clinic to speak with me.
Yeah, beautiful. And I'll put all the details below in the show notes and I'll be able to
Perfect.
contact you. Is there anything that you wish to talk or discuss or put in before we call this an end?
No, I think like we covered a lot today, so I
We
don't want
did.
to belabor or overwhelm whoever's listening to us with more details. But I think just a good reminder to start where you are. It doesn't need to happen. I know we've talked, because we did talk a lot about everything. We're like from diet to working out to stress management. And those are all huge topics. They're very simple concepts, but they're huge. This is why we're where we are at, because they're quite difficult to modify. So don't let it deter you. Start where you are, make one simple change today, and then build from that.
Yeah, that's absolutely great advice. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the Natural Health Podcast, Anna.
Thank you for having me.
Beautiful. Thank you for joining us at Natural Health Podcast. And remember, the missing link between failure and success is your health.